Thanks for coming to my talk. I'm Adam Kareem. I'm the creator and lead developer for Protodroid DeLTA, which I'll talk about a little later. I got one of my best and great hires, Armand, sitting in the audience, one of the first environment artists I got through a platform which I'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, welcome to my talk about finding inspiration and planning luck, a story of a solo dev dad of color. So yeah, I'm Adam Kareem. A bit about myself. I've always been like a game dev hobbyist. Like I kind of got into games just as a hobby. I was like sitting around at work one day and a friend of mine was like, have you heard of like this thing called Unity and Unreal? And I was like, what the heck is that? And he explained to me that like regular people can make games. I always thought you had to work at Square or Eidos or something or whatever. But no, you can just be young, dumb, and broke and make video games, specifically if you're broke, because all this stuff is free now. So I do that. I picked it up as a hobby. By day, like I work in tech. So I work in tech in the Bay Area out here, and my background has nothing to do with games actually. Like I'm a mechanical engineer, but decided just to pick up like game development because I was inspired by games I used to love, like Mega Man X and Sonic and other franchises. Another important thing about me is that I'm married and I got 2 kids. So not a lot of time is on my hands, and I've also got these folks, you know, my family to kind of support and take care of, and that's a really important factor into why I chose this particular game dev path. I don't necessarily want to recommend it. Whenever I see like single young people, I'm like, do it now, make your game. Because, oh boy, I don't think it's harder. And yeah, this is my game, Protodroid DeLTA, for those who are unfamiliar. It is basically Mega Man X, but in 3D. That's literally the tagline, and literally what got me inspired to make the game. As you can see, there's a lot of jumping and shooting, just like the Sequelitis video, man. They should have named them Jumping and Shoot, man, because all you do is jump and shoot. Like that just stuck with me, man. It's like a seminal moment in my history. And so this is the game. There's a lot of focusing on like platforming while doing combat in parallel with each other. And I like it. But I didn't start out thinking I want to make Protodroid DeLTA. I'm going to make this Mega Man X inspired thing, and it's going to be my magnum opus. You know, as a general rule for any folks who are new to game development, do not make your first project your dream project, because as a rule, you're going to make 100 mistakes in the first thing you make, right? And you're going to make 50 mistakes in the second and 25 in the third. So you don't want your baby and the thing that you really want to be the thing that has those 100 mistakes, because it'll look like the ugliest child ever. You'll be one of those kids where it's one of those parents who's like, oh, he's got a good heart. But that's my baby, man. Yeah, it's an ugly baby. So but I found inspiration by like just looking at stuff I love as a kid, right? I loved like Super Mario World. I loved like the Zelda games in 2D, and I loved Mega Man X. And I always hoped that it would make the transition from 2D to 3D the same way these other gaming icons did, and so almost like establish a new like way of imagining. And we're like pillars in those genres in 3D space, right? Dang, my slide got messed up. Dang, it's Google Slides. Why are you doing me like that? The Super Metroid's supposed to be further down, but that's okay. But Mega Man never really did that, right? There were the X games. There were a couple attempts in 3D, like the notorious X7, burn it to the ground. But that wasn't really what people had in mind for like, oh yeah, Mega Man X in 3D, this is what I want to do. Similarly, right, there's tons of 2D Mega Man games and tons of 2D inspired Mega Man games, like from 20XX and 30XX and all kinds of stuff, right? And it seemed like everyone really is treading this 2D space, this 2D plane, but there are very few attempts at it in 3D. And so this was a big inspiration for me, was that like I love the idea of like reimagining things and differentiating. Let me go back a slide. And I was like, wow, it's like there's only been a handful of games like this. And I was convinced that, and I can talk about this later in detail, but I was convinced that it's not that the idea of Mega Man doesn't work in 3D, because folks saw X7 and was like, that's it, can't do it in 3D, go back to the 2D plane. But we see games like Ratchet and Clank, which are in their DNA very, very similar to what Mega Man could have been in 3D. But again, I didn't just jump straight into doing the Mega Man game. As a hobbyist, there was a bunch of interests I have. I loved Sonic. I loved Ape Escape as a kid. I loved Mega Man Legends. And so I made fan games of each of these different things, each night just kind of tinkering away and learning more about game development along the way, right? And I learned some stuff through that iterating, right? And if anyone's interested in those fan games, we can talk about it afterwards. Just for constraints of time, I didn't want to get into them too much. But like I've found out about myself as a game developer by making those games. I found that like, hey, this Sonic game, I love it. It's fun, but I'm not very good at it. The level design was not going to scale well for a single person to kind of continue to make levels of that scale. And it was very time consuming. I was like, huh. And getting his mechanics right, going up and down hills, I was like, I like this, but I'm not so strong at this. With the Mega Man Legends game, I liked it because honestly, that was the game I really wanted to make. Was like a Mega Man, like get me off the moon, man. The Mega Man Legends like 3, how they got canceled, just kind of cut me deep. And I was like, man, if I can get better at this game dev stuff, maybe I can be the one that kind of does this. But I sucked at it. So it wasn't gonna be me, I tell you what. But I learned that from iterating, that like I liked it, though I liked it, I wasn't very good at it. So to invest myself further in something I'm not good at was not a good recipe. Lastly, there was Tough Stuff, which is basically an Ape Escape inspired game. You run around, catch a bunch of stuffed animals that have gotten really aggressive, AKA tough, hence the name Tough Stuffed Animals. Yes, I'm a literary genius, I tell myself. And I liked it, and I was good at it, right? But there was another game I made that I made it in almost the fastest time and was just the most exciting to make, and that was Mega Man X and Zero Training Missions, which was literally that 3D Mega Man X. And I put it up on Game Jolt and Itch and stuff. People played it, and they enjoyed it. And I was like, okay, this seems like it's got traction. So that's the first sort of tip, I guess, from along my journey is as we're all scoping out games and trying to find what to do, particularly those new to the games, like you got to find that match between what you love and what you're good at. Because it's not enough to just to love something, and you won't go very far if all you do, if you're just good at it, but you don't love it. And I only found that by doing a lot, by making a bunch of games. So I'm spending all this time making fan games, and then I'm realizing, man, this is a nice little screenshot or whatever, but this is the result of like 2.5 years of just like tinkering. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm spending a lot of time with these characters and these mechanics with stuff that at the end of the day, I can only go but so far. I can't sell this. I can't like own it. Plus, I don't know about you guys. There's like a stigma in the game community about like fan games. It's like it can be legit, but if it's got like fan game on it, it's like but it's not the real thing. It's like, even if and so like it's unfortunate. So I was like, I'm spending so much time in this, and so it doesn't make sense to keep down this path. So it's time that I make it my own. And with this prospect, now that I know what I want to make this Mega Man X and Zero thing. But I want to make it my own in some way. I hope you don't yawn too much, my friend. If I'm that boring, please, you have the right to smack me. Come up to the stage. Smack me in the face. And so I wanted to make it my own. So as I'm setting out to make game characters, right? I think of all the games that I've played and all the games, the characters that we look at. You see the things like Genshin Impact and its huge roster. We look at League of Legends, got over like 50 or whatever champions. You look at like all the Final Fantasy series, and I've tried to sample different images from like both Western developers, like Chinese developers, and Asian developers and such. And it's like a common trend. I think it's to pick up on it, but they all look very similar, right? And then when you contrast that with, there's just some quick like screen grabs I just got on Google searching. Of what the world looks like, what this audience looks like, what like San Francisco looks like, what the world that we actually inhabit looks like. There's a strong contrast. There are more colors. There's more cultures. And it sucks that there's this broken link between worlds, a sort of riff on the Zelda reference, where we're allowing ourselves and entering ourselves in these fantasy worlds, and we're creating these worlds that look increasingly not like the worlds we come from, and aren't really making space for people who don't look like that. So when I remember as a kid, one of the first like OCs I did or whatever, I tried making some like anime character. And then I went to kind of make his features a little bit more black looking, like his nose a little rounder, like his hair a little puffier. And it just felt so wrong. And I was like, okay, let me, Cloud's got cool hair. Cloud Strife, that's the hair I'm going for. My hair looked up, maybe now it does. But back then it looked nothing like Cloud Strife. Like that's not the texture of like black hair. That's not the texture of like Arab hair or different like hairstyles, right? And so I was like, well, if I can make this game my own, let me look at the Mega Man example, right? There's another example where you've got over 30 titles. I'm sorry if to talk that heavy or whatever. I wasn't trying to surprise everybody. This is a huge inspiration for me, this opportunity to create something in a way that we don't see too much. So you look at the Mega Man franchise, right? Over 30 titles, hundreds of characters. The protagonists are almost always guys, over 90% of the time. Back to that clash, that broken link between worlds. Our world population is almost 50% female. And yet our games only relegate them to support characters or waifus or whatever, like side dishes or whatever, but very seldomly like, the hero. Very seldomly for people to look up to, and almost always white, unfortunately, or like fairer skin, right? And that's a lot of games to be doing the same thing over and over again. No, I get it. Like a lot of these titles are Japanese titles, and cultures are different, right? And I do get it. But the reality is that increasingly games are consumed on a global market. And games are being played by people all over the world. And so we're kind of long overdue that the games look more like the people who love them. And the way we love games, they love us back, right? So this is a fun little thought experiment. This is my favorite. This is a well-known character select screen, right? We all know this character select screen. There's 64 characters on here. Now and what's interesting about it, it's in a lot of ways like a celebration of icons in gaming history, with 30 years of gaming history icons, right? So over 30 years, let's just apply some quick filters, right? Like, okay, let's remove all the characters that don't have dark skin. Oh, we lost 40 of them. God dang. Rest in peace to homies. You look good, but nah. But they're gone. Now, if you look at what's left, there's like, okay, there's an odd sort of, there's a bit of a common thread. They're all animals or robots or just some sort of non-human thing, right? Or like furries. So if you apply another filter, okay, let's take out the non-human characters. See, what do we got left? We're left with 2. We lost another 22. Rest in peace to homies. And now we went from a character selection of 64 characters to just 2. So someone like me, like this individual, the nice afro in front of me, like the woman next to him, right? Darker skinned people. You look at this, and if you want to play a character that looks kind of like you, reminds you of you, you've got a bad guy in Ganondorf who's like, I mean, he's just like evil incarnate, like, right? And Mr. Game & Watch. Now the funny thing, Game & Watch, is that he's literally black. Like I feel like if I went to someone and said, hey, I need you to add a black character to the game, and he came back and said, hey, Game & Watch? Like, I didn't say a black man. I said like, and it's wild, right? And it's similar with like, and I select Smash Bros. Because of just how well known it is and how it represents such a long history of games. And this is what people have been sort of like, we've been consuming for so long, right? And you look at similarly with like the females in the games, 64 to 12. And then often what happens is there is a girl, there's a guy variant as well, because you can't not do that. Ice Climber's got her husband on. You know, Wii Fit Trainer, there's a male variant of that, Me Fighter, right? Inkling. And so it's like, and so I took inspiration from this opportunity to sort of like create a space for people who seldom see themselves in gaming and create characters that people who look like me or who don't often see people looking like themselves in games can say, oh yeah, she looks like my mom. She looks like my sister. And I want to cosplay as that person. I see myself in that person. I can see myself as the hero. And so that's what my cast of characters looks like. It's got a number of black characters, a couple of Latino characters as well, and just trying to borrow and sample from different cultures of the people that I knew growing up and who often see themselves in games. But I would be remiss if I didn't highlight the important thing, which is that the times they are changing, right? This is just a smattering of a lot of different like protagonists and lead characters. We're seeing more female leads. We're seeing more dark-skinned characters in games. And it's exciting and it is encouraging. But, I mean, come on now, right? This is about 4 years in the making, right? And we can't sort of rest on our laurels and be like, yes, we got a black inkling. We have made progress. We're done. Get back to get back to things as scheduled, right? And so it's important just to note that, like, number one, to recognize that it's great that things are improving. I'm really impressed with like Omega Strikers, for example, a bunch of ex or former a former of like Riot devs who decided to make a game, and they're very deliberate about their character design choices, right? To create spaces for people who usually aren't allowed at the table. So I'm going to shift gears a bit now. Like the second half of my talk is about planning luck, right? So it's like I took inspiration from games I used to play as a kid and playing Mega Man and such, and I took inspiration, the opportunity to create characters and to create a world that's more reflective of the world that I've known and many people have known. But then it comes down to, how do you make a game? How do you then actually take these ideas and then get in and start to be successful in creating what you want to do? And to do that, we have to have a small lesson in probability. If you think of luck as a numbers game, so let's assume Adam Kareem is absolutely abysmal at basketball. I actually cannot shoot at all. Like, my jump shot is abysmal. It's quite terrible. And so this is not far from the truth. I do have a 1% chance of making any shot I take, right? Why was that so funny to you, man? Hey, man, 1%ers unite. So we're awful, right? So if you're awful at it, if I only take 3 shots, right, I've got a 2.9% chance that just one of the 3 goes in, right? So how about I take a few more shots? Let me take 12 of them. You know, I'm just feeling myself that day at the court. No one's coming on. Let me take a few more. Well, if I made 12 attempts, my chance of success jumps 4x, right? And it goes to almost 11.4. Still abysmal chances, but you kind of see what's happening. Now, don't make the mistake, you know, the independent events, the probability doesn't scale linearly. It's not like if you take 100 shots, you're 100% chance to make it. It does start to taper off. But if I was just feeling myself, I was like, hey man, the kid's asleep, wife's chilling, I'm about to hit me a shot today. And I shot 100 times, there's a 63.4% chance I make it once. And then for me, that's my success. I just want to make it once, right? And so if you think of luck as your developers and going out and trying to recruit talent, to trying to make connections that'll make a difference in your projects, you think of luck as actions that you take to increase the probability of success. This is what it means to make your own luck. This is what it means to stack the deck in your favor. So what does that look like practically? Coming as an outsider, I was a hobbyist, right? I'd never been to GDC, never been to a PAX, never been to anything. I didn't have any gaming connections. So I had to rely on social media tools. Fiverr, Upwork, platforms like that, ArtStation, Discord servers, connecting with people, and eventually I made my way to work with indies. Each of these are a shot with like a 1%, maybe less than chance that I'll find the talent that I need, or I'll find what I need for this project. And so what that looks like practically is scouring Fiverr for about 2 hours a day for several months, looking at everyone's portfolio, putting a bunch of listings, communicating constantly until I find that one who ended up being the game's lead illustrator, Def Juice, and he does all the game's character art. Took a lot of time, but that's how but without those actions, that I don't connect with that guy, this art doesn't get made. Similarly with ArtStation, as I started working from different platforms, I was like, man, Reddit is real bad at this. Like, I'm not finding nobody on Reddit. This is a waste of my time. Like, starving artists, that nonsense. I feel like Twitter, oh God, it's the thin pickings out here. So you start finding, taking better shots from these previous misses. You start learning, okay, I have a higher chance if I move a little bit closer to the rim, or I have a higher chance if I move a little bit to the right. So I made my way to ArtStation, moving a little bit to the right, and now I can post job listings and find people who are more matches, who are looking themselves for artwork and to help with a game. And so over a number of job listings, 5,000 views, over 300 applicants, about an hour or so a day for several days for months. And eventually I land the game's lead environment artist. And then he himself was responsible for nearly 40% of the game's art. That's how you kind of manufacture luck. As I'm and this is over the time span of you can sense with these months, the time span of years, right? Or on the time scale of years. Similarly with Discord servers, jumping between them. Similarly with eventually made my way to work with indies. Shout out to the homies. That's a great place for finding talent. That's why I found this wonderful individual, Armand. I think so. We're going to go with that. And so this is what it looks like in practice, making yourself lucky. Now, a lot of people here at GDC to secure publishing deals. That's what it's about, trying to advance your current project and the next project. And for a lot of folks, the thought is that, it's a very, the theory is that it's a linear thing. I went to GDC, I went to room 300, I met with some reps at Team 17, they liked the project, and we got a publishing deal. Or I was tweeting, screenshot Saturday a couple times, and then someone over at Devolver saw my post and was like, oh, we love it, here's some money. Or I launched a Kickstarter, I got some funds, I got some friends, and then someone swooped in and said, we love it, here's some money. But in reality, it goes back to that sort of shot-taking approach, where every person you meet is another shot. Every tweet you send is another shot, each with a slight, slim chance of success. And so you stack the deck in your favor and you manufacture luck by just taking lots of quality shots. And so particularly when it comes to networking and practice, it looks like this: a bunch of misses and then one hit, because it really only takes one. Remember that scene from Endgame when Doctor Strange is like, ugh. One. That's really all it takes, in a lot of ways to make significant changes in your project and in your lives. I just think a lot about Harvey Dent from The Dark Knight, how he was I'm not lucky, I make my own luck. Because that sucker had a coin which was heads on both sides. Of course it's always going to land heads, but that's really what it is. You take deliberate actions to stack the deck in your favor. So what did networking look like for me in practice? So I started off on Twitter because I don't know nobody. And I was inspired by Gwen Frey. She's another solo developer working on Unreal, working in Blueprints, formerly an artist. And she launched Kind by herself. She was an inspiration to me. So I reached out to her. Similarly, while I'm posting, getting ready for the Kickstarter, John Gavin Paulson, formerly of Humble, sees a couple of my tweets. And he's like, hey, game looks cool. I think at this point, hey, I'm on that fast track. I think, hey, I met John. I'm right here, baby. I'm just a couple meters away from that publishing deal. But in reality, he connected me to someone else, right? And Gwen connected me to someone else. So Gwen connected me to Forrest Dowling. He, throughout my journey, ended up being a mentor. He taught me a lot about just what to expect, how to talk with artists, how to just the mechanics of how to run a studio, because he himself is a studio head. And then Justin was just incredible in all the things. He's of the leader of the Media Indie Exchange and the Mix, leader of Black Voices in Game. Just a great guy all around. And he connected me to the Black Voices in Gaming Discord. From there, I met, one person on the Discord is like, hey, I got a programmer friend who's looking for work. I hired that guy, and he helped it with, and he was an important initial hire to kind of lay the foundation for the boss AI in the game. Like, we sort of collaborated on that. Similarly, another guy, Sir Billion, with his project Breeze in the Clouds, I was like, your art's cool. Do you know any artists? Finding an animator is like so hard, like traditional 2D animation these days. But his project was all about that. So I was like, I got it. Something tells me he might know one. And so he connected me with a team which did the animated trailer that we'll launch with. And then Graham of Legend is an amazing UX designer, UI designer that was also in that Discord. So these things are all like helping to shape the project. The project's moving along, getting a bit more of its final state, right? But then similarly, Justin was a big advocate for me being one of the first recipients of the Black Game Developer Fund that Humble launched, right? Keep in mind, there's long time spans between this. I met Justin about like 8 months later, the BGDF thing happens, right? It's a long time of just like taking shots and trying to manufacture luck. But that then gave me enough funding to produce a compelling vertical slice. About almost a year, time kind of passes, and then eventually Humble comes back and they're like, hey, we like what we're seeing. Let's talk about a publishing deal. So that's exciting. Yay, I got published. Yay. And it only takes one, right? Back to that in-game thing. Like, Justin was that one from all those shots I took, right? And however, it's not all like roses once you get a publishing deal, because the thing that I had to keep in mind was that, like, this is me kind of freaking out because Humble said they liked the project so much, they were like, we want to give you more money. You're asking for a certain amount. What if we gave you 2 or 3x that? And most folks would jump at the opportunity. Oh, heck yeah. Excuse me, I don't know. Kids are going to watch this. Heck yeah. Gee willikers, yes. I'll take the money, thank you. But I had to keep in mind my profile. I work full-time, not in games. I've got a wife and kids. This has always been like a hobby for me that I just kind of wanted to advance and advance and advance. And with the experience I learned from making the game to that point, with the fan games I made, I kind of knew what I was good at, what I was limited by, and that if I were to take this larger deal, I'd be, like, the scope would creep tremendously. Like, I'd possibly consider going full-time, which is not something I was comfortable doing. Now, granted, my story is not like a tell-all for everyone. Like, I actually kind of advise against it. But like, I needed to retain the scope so I could retain what was important to me and protect what was important to me. And so, these are all things that are important to me, like my wife, my kids, and being able to continue to support them with what I do full time. Learning from the fan games that I worked on that, like, you kind of have your niche, you kind of have your zone, you kind of know what shots you can hit. So don't step out to the three-point line when you're more DeMar DeRozan, less Steph Curry, right? You stay in the mid-range. Folks, basketball fans got that. For those who don't, I don't know what the analogy is. I don't know. You're a mage, and you want to yield a great sword. You won't hit, and you will never crit. So I looked at myself, and for those who don't know, back to the basketball reference, this is what's called like a heat map. A lot of like advanced analytics, they track basically where players take shots and where their field goal percentage, how often they hit those shots in different parts of the floor. And it isn't one-to-one where everyone's going to make more shots the closer you are to the rim. Some people, like Steph, for example, are exceptional the further they go from the rim. And there's like a mid-region where they're not so good. I knew from my work to this point that I was more of a drive the lane. I was more of a short-range type of person, given my constraints. So my chances of success, my sweet spot was a more limited scope and keeping the game honest to what I always intended, which is going to be. And those came with some serious like design kind of concessions, because it was like, Mega Man is traditionally like 8 bosses, right? 8 worlds. But I was like, well, given how this has been going, I think I can squeeze 4, right? Is that going to be a betrayal to the Mega Man fans? Is that going to really matter to people? I don't know, but that's the scope that I can handle. Right? There's a consideration of additional playable characters, or how do you increase like the replay value? It's like, I'm not a replay value kind of guy, I like my one and done type of situation. And so for me, I had to, if I considered luck as taking shots that I could hit, I had to keep the scope within my range, right? And so fortunately, it was a match. Humble was like, although we'd like the game to be bigger, and we want to give you more money, and we don't typically hear people say no to more money, we'll rock with that. we'll meet. We think what you're doing is interesting enough and special, and so we want to support that. So that's my kind of advice there, is that like you will. I think all developers find themselves at a crossroads where it's like, do I make a single player or multiplayer? Do I increase? Is the world going to be like permanent, like a single map, or is it going to be like, is it open world, or are we going to have like discrete levels? And if you go back to knowing what you're good at and what you like, and just holding true to like what you feel give you the greatest chance of success, that's my advice, is to stick true to what you know you can do, what you're comfortable and what you can execute on successfully. Not to say you shouldn't stretch yourself a bit, but not to be sort of allured by like, oh, more money, bigger means better. It doesn't always necessarily mean better. So I wanted to close the talk and I'll open for questions after this last bit called Finding Inspiration Volume 2. So as I'm making the game and kind of going on the journey, there's ups and downs in game development. For those who don't know, porting is awful. Anyone who's ever port anything to anything is a terrible decision, all right? But we got to do it because of the monies. But like, it's just a terrible, terrible experience. 5 minutes. Gotcha. That's my girl down there. All right. And so, but just generally speaking, a lot of ups and downs where I felt like, am I doing this? Am I going the right way? I'm spending a lot of time with this boss. The game has become like a pain to kind of deal with. And late during the development, as I was sort of like not losing my mind, because keep in mind, I still have like the full-time job, and we had design reviews. I had to travel to Taiwan for work, a bunch of other stuff, and I got this thing which won't just be done. You get deflated and feel like, man, why should I keep up with this? And then, fortunately, I just think about, I had this moment with my kids. My daughter on the left, you can see there. As I'm hired my illustrator, my comic illustrator, Blaze Malefica on Twitter, Argentinian artist. We were doing something like, well, DeLTA's hair is cool, but a big thing in Black community is like just doing your hair different ways. You know what I'm saying? Getting braids, getting cornrows, puffing it out, all kinds of things, right? So I was like, it'd be cool if we could just kind of toy around with just some concepts of DeLTA with different hairstyles. And then as we're kind of doing that, I'm kind of offering like edits on the screen. My daughter, she's only 3. I think she's like 2.5 at the time. She walks up to me and she says, "Dada, me." She saw herself as the hero. My son, similarly, with Vega, another like hidden character in the game that gets revealed later in the narrative, he's always like yelling to his sister, "I'm Vega, you're DeLTA, I'm Vega." Like, they see themselves, and it's not like this is the first video game they've seen. We play Mario, we play all types of stuff, we watch all types of things. But it's one of the first moments where it was just second nature. The same way a lot of people see Cloud Strife and think, that's me growing up as a kid. I'm gonna be big sword, spiky hair, that's me all day, right? Like, she had that opportunity at 3 to see herself as the hero and not exposed to a world where that's not the norm, right? So that moment alone, I was like, you know what? I'm done. This game is done. We're mission accomplished, Adam. Your daughter loves it. It's over. But that was a huge second win that, like, wow, remember that, like, that was one of your main drivers is to create a space and to create characters in a world that addresses a lot of needs that we've dealt with as consumers of content, consumers of games and entertainment. And that's, like, I guess my parting advice for folks here is that, like, everyone has something about them, right, that you don't see often on the big screen, on the video game space. Maybe you're a veteran. Maybe you're bilingual. Maybe you're disabled. Maybe there's something. You all have something that we don't often recognize in our fantasies. And it behooves you to take up the mantle and to inject yourself into those fantasies and to inject creators and characters like that. And it doesn't always have to be you. I grew up around a lot of Latino people. One of the girls that have crushed on me in elementary school, her name, she was Spanish, she was cool, I don't know what, right? And that was just people I knew. So I was like, I don't see a lot of them in games either. So let me throw some of those characters in my game as well. Do it respectfully, of course, you know what I'm saying? But you don't necessarily have to be of a community, of an identity in order to advocate for it and to kind of create and add into our worlds. So that's my talk. This is the last panel from the game. After you complete the game and the epilogue plays, the credits play, this is the very last panel where they say, together we are stronger because together we're better. And so, yeah, thank you for coming to my talk, and I'll take questions. If anyone's got questions, they say to come to the mic up here.
Hello.
Hello.
In regards to earlier on in your TED Talk, you talked about the inclusivity of games, and in particular, you focused on ones made primarily in Japan and China.
Yeah.
In the Asian area, they often do not have people of color, and do you think something like that has basically shaped how they describe their characters?
Yeah,
and
that's
that
a fair...
may be a reason why they don't have as many people of color or other races within their games.
That's a fair question. I would almost reply with a question back of, are those media only consumed in Asia? Are those games only played in Japan? Or they only played
but
in
it's their
China?
frame of reference.
It is a frame of reference, right? And so as creators, right, we have the ability to imagine all kinds of things. It kind of speaks similarly to like the director of the latest Final Fantasy game, right? Who was like, we don't have black people because it's not accurate to our like historical fantasy. There weren't dragons there either, right? So we in some ways we allow our imagination to be unconstrained and to be inclusive of all kinds of things. But in other ways we're making deliberate choices to not be. And so whereas, yeah, maybe they're from, I do, to your point though, I do believe that people are not inherently racist or bigoted, that they create stuff that they can see themselves in. They create characters they see themselves in. But I think we've been doing this for so long that it's beyond time that now that media is consumed globally, and if you're trying to get people who don't look like you to pay for what you're doing and to love your content, it's high time that we love them back, right?
So you think it's a good thing that may change in the future?
I hope so. I think so. I think the more that more people are featured in our media, I don't see how that would be worse. I'll put it that way. That's a good question, though. I'm glad you asked it. Go ahead.
Yeah, first off, thank you very much. That was an incredible talk. Really wonderful. Thank you. My question is kind of very practical because you mentioned having a full-time engineer job and a wife and 2 kids. And so my question is just, how did you mentioned like dev time at night? How? Where? How do you make time for this? That's like truly how?
That's a fair question. Kids are showing the meeting. No, but realistically, the nuts and bolts. One was that scope limitation I talked about. Like the game would have realistically been done in a year and a half had I gone full time. It took me almost 3 years to do it because of the limited amount of time I can commit to it. But the how, it was mostly this. I'd work in the day from about 8 or 9 till like 5 or 6. I'd spend time with my wife and kids for a couple hours. Once they went to bed, I'd work on the game from I'd say 8 or 9 till about 1, maybe sometimes 2 in the morning, and sleep and kind of rinse and repeat. On the weekends, I would work with my wife to commit that on Sundays are daddy's dev days. So I treat it like a full-time work day. Vacations were work days for me. What else did we end up doing? There was a time when she went to go visit family, and I got most of the boss AI completed because she went with the kids to visit my in-laws for a month, and that was a month of me, I'd stop work at 5, and I'd pick up game dev from 5 till I worked almost, 8 and 8 basically, right? And so and that's why I say I don't necessarily advise this to people because it was very grueling, but those inspirations were really powered me kind of through it. But yeah, it was took a lot.
That's amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, we have to start preparing this room for the next talk, but if people are interested in continued discussion, there's alcoves available on the other side of the floor where people can form a wrap-up room if they're interested in continuing discussing and asking questions.
Cool. Yeah, I'm around. Thanks, everybody.